My name is David Hampton. My wife Carole Hampton. We are from Perth, Western Australia. I am the grandson of Mr. Mujahideen, who is the gentleman in the photo, who in Port Augusta married an Australian woman, Clara Window, but prior to his marriage to my grandmother, Clara Window, Mr. Mujahideen had been a camel driver who had operated in the South Australian areas and including trips to Coward Springs, which yesterday one of the first persons speaking spoke of Coward Springs. My grandfather, Mr. Mujahideen, and my grandmother, Clara Window, moved from South Australia, much to the chagrin of Clara's family, who felt they were losing her. They moved across to Western Australia. We're not sure how they got to Western Australia, possibly by ship to Albany. There's even a thought they might have walked over, but that sounds too hard. They lost a child on that relocation from South Australia to Western Australia, and then they went up to a substantial mining town called Leonora, north of Kalgoorlie, and my grandfather, from what we can understand, had probably stopped being a camel driver at that stage, and he became a market gardener at a place called Menzies, which had a dam. Thank you, Carole. Malcolm, which had a railway dam for the steam engines. So he had water to irrigate the crops, and he then sold fruit and vegetables. So by the time he was in Leonora, Mr. Mujahideen was not a camel driver, but that transition from driving camels to quite often described as a hawker was quite common for the Afghans. I might add that my grandfather did not regard himself as an Afghan. He was clearly and proudly described to my mother, Violet Zuleika, as he said, "I am an Indian." So that was British India, which at that stage had India and what became Pakistan, East Pakistan or West Pakistan, and probably a big chunk of Afghanistan too. My grandfather and Clara Window had 4 children, Carole? 5. 4 boys and 1 girl, my lovely mother, Violet Zuleika, in Leonora. My grandfather died at a youngish age in Leonora, and the doctor had no idea what had killed Mr. Mujahideen or why he had died. And his contribution was to ask my grandmother a weird question: what do they die of in India? In other words, he had to sign the death certificate, and he wanted a disease to be able to write down, and that obviously shocked my grandmother, because it was a story that my mother repeated to me often. On the death of Mr. Mujahideen, my grandfather, at some stage, Mr. Mujahideen's half-brother, we believe, Mudassar Baradeen, married the widow, my grandmother, and looked after the 5 children, and then had 4 children of his own. And Carole, my wife, is going to hold up the photo, which you can describe, Carole.
Okay, there's David's mother and one of the Mujahideen boys.
Jack.
This is Mick, Myrtle, Olive and Mum are from the second husband. and that's Clara. So we've got 2 of the originals and 4 of the new children.
My Uncle Jack, Adjabdeen. So it was not an easy name to say, so you can see why the boys probably stopped using their Indian names.
This Jack, the oldest one, he actually is buried in the Muslim section of Northampton Cemetery in Western Australia. I believe he's the only one that's buried in a Muslim grave. This child here is the one that died in Coolgardie. His nickname was Cuckoo, and I think he might have died of measles or something like that after the long journey from South Australia. Which
really made my grandmother very, very sad.
An interesting part is Clara had a sister called Mary. Mary's husband was a partner to Mr. Mujahideen, and they were both at Coward Springs. So Gulbadeen, the partner, married Mary Window, the sister, but we don't know what happened to her, and I've made lots of inquiries.
Just disappeared.
So disappeared.
So really Mr. Mujahideen's camel driving was in South Australia, and I think by the time he came to Western Australia, because he had children, he wasn't a camel driver anymore, and he became more a market gardener and a hawker. His half brother, Madassa Baradeen, then relocated the children down to Perth, and my mum grew up in Maylands, which was my suburb of growing up. Can I say that my mother did not get on as well with her uncle, and she called him uncle, Madassa Baradeen, because he was quite religious. He would go to the mosque. Indeed, he was one of the founders of the Perth Mosque in William Street. So there was a conflict between my feisty mother, Violet Zuleika, and Mr. Baradeen. But in fairness to Mr. Baradeen, he provided a home for those children, and my mother appreciated that. I think I can only remember seeing Mr. Baradeen once or twice in my life. He was a dark-skinned man who was, to me, a little bit scary, but he provided a good home for my mother and the other children, certainly the younger children.
I was just going to say, the earlier part, when Mr. Mujahideen first came out from India, he actually went to Coolgardie. Whether he went to Coolgardie first and then to South Australia, or South Australia to Coolgardie and back again, I don't know. But that might have been why they actually came back to Coolgardie, because he probably knew people. There were a lot of Afghans in Coolgardie. There was a lot of employment there because there were a lot of prospectors looking for gold, and they needed water. And the camels were really needed for carting water all around that, opening up goldfields as well.
I'm jumping in the timeline here, but Carole's mentioned Coolgardie, the pivotal role of Coolgardie. My grandfather, Mr. Mujahideen, died in Leonora, but was interred or buried in the Coolgardie cemetery, and right at the back was the Muslim area, and all he was afforded was a number 25, which a good research work by Carole. We found out that was Mr. Mujahideen's grave, and Carole then organised to have a headstone for Mr. Mujahideen. I'll read it out if you don't mind. Mujahideen, Afghan cameleer, 1873 to 1916. Born Pakistan, died Leonora, Western Australia. Married Clara Ellen Window, my grandmother, at Port Augusta, South Australia in 1903. Children, Adjabdeen, Uncle Jack, I knew him. Mohammed, I knew him as Uncle Butch, Violet Zuleika, my lovely mother, Fazaldine, who had different names, Fat or Pat, and Gulab is Uncle Dude, who's the youngest of the Mujahideen children. And that lovely headstone is in the Coolgardie cemetery now, which is, I think you'll agree, something nicer than 25. That was the lack of recognition. That was in a distant part of the Coolgardie cemetery. And you had to know that the Muslims were buried up there to find that. And so there were some headstones in Coolgardie, some prominent cameleers, Carole. Yes. But my grandfather was just number 25. So that now, the headstone organised by Carole represents a lovely history that our children, for example, have been photographed next to that headstone.
Once we got the headstone put on the grave at Coolgardie, I then contacted everyone I had the details of in the family, whether I knew them well or not. And I just said, if you ever want to go and see where your grandfather, great-grandfather or whatever is buried, this is how he fits into your family. And since then, I've had on Facebook and several emails from other people, a lot of younger people gone to the grave and been photographed, and probably took more of an interest in the history then as well. So, but our two children are very interested, and they've both been up there individually with their husbands, wives, whatever, and they hopefully will pass it on to their children.
Robbie, you asked about the boys being raised as Muslims and their education and religion. I wasn't there when that happened, but I do know that Uncle Jack Ajabdeen was buried as a Muslim in a Muslim ceremony in the small town of Northampton, which is to the north of Geraldton. Northampton, was it Northampton or Mullawa? Northampton. So yeah, he must have made a requirement of his half-brother, Uncle Mick, whose name was what, Carole? Uncle Mick. He was he was a Barradine. So my Uncle Mick was maybe my mother's favourite brother. He organised to have Ajabdeen or Jack buried as a Muslim in the Northampton cemetery.
Old cemetery, yep. That was Michael Yusuf, sorry. Michael Yusuf was Uncle Mick.
Michael Yusuf, yep.
And interestingly, the girls of the second husband, their names were Olive, Fatma, Myrtle, Aisha, and then the boy was Mahmood or Mam. But each of them had the name of a flower, Violet from the first husband, Olive and Myrtle, and then they all had a second Afghan name, or Zuleika, Fatma and Aisha. So, and some of the grandchildren have named their children. One is Zuleika, another one is Aisha as well. So that's our children's generation as well.
That's grandchildren, yeah, the grandchildren, yep. So it's lovely. It's just a nice recognition. It was the same deal, the same arrangement between my grandmother Clara Window and Mr. Mujahideen with respect to the naming of the girls to have a Christian name, first Christian name. That arrangement probably extended to the girls being given a Christian upbringing. Indeed, my mother went to a very stern Catholic school, very stern and with a very harsh nun. So, but she was raised as a Christian, never ever went to the mosque. She knew where the mosque was, and she remained a Christian for all of her life. and it was my pleasure to, as a son, to go to Anglican or Church of England services with my lovely old mother in Maylands, and that was good. But yeah, none of the three girls had any connection that I knew of with the Muslim faith, and I suspect that Uncle Jack Ajabdeen was maybe the only one of the boys who embraced aspects of Islam. The boys, I think, I mentioned they all went to jail. They were, I think, wild children, and they probably didn't want to get involved with religion, but that was their life. And I'm sure it was a tough life.
Mm. And that was the time of the White Australia policy. Anyone knew from Europe or anywhere that was dark-skinned was probably looked down on and probably got into a bit of trouble stealing things. That was mainly they stole food. Yeah, I think they had quite a comfortable life in Leonora and Malcolm. They were towns close together. I think my mother never spoke in a way that it indicated that they had a poor life. I think they actually had quite a comfortable life, and she loved her dad, Mr. Mujahideen, who was I guess he was a far-sighted person to marry an Australian woman. So they had a good life in Leonora, and it was rather strange, that connection with Leonora. Yes, the Malcolm Dam out of Leonora is it's been there for a long time. It's a history of, in Leonora, there's a mining town, a sister town called Gwalia, which is mainly Italian miners. A lot of people used to go to Malcolm Dam just to cool off, and a lot of people drowned there because it was so deep and they couldn't swim. But when David's grandfather was there with the family, they used the water there to irrigate the crops they were growing, and they used to advertise the growing of fruit and vegetables, and he had a cart and he'd transport the cart into town with Violet, David's mum, on the cart as well, and sell to various people in Leonora and probably around the area as well. I believe that David's, or what Violet called uncle, the man that married the widow, may have been there as well in Leonora Malcolm with his half-brother. Also, Clara's mother was there from South Australia, and Clara's brother, Alan, was there as well from South Australia. So the brother, Alan, looked after his mother. So there was Clara the sister, Alan the brother, and their mother, and they all lived close by each other and looked after the children, whatever. And when the old lady died, Clara's mother, and she's buried in Leonora, Alan then went to war, but he didn't go to war until she died, and he looked after her. And then when he came back from the war, he had been a prisoner of war, and like many people that came back after the First World War, he took off to the bush, went up north with a lot of other people, just couldn't face things anymore. But he did come back and see the family, and then he'd go off again. So,
Barbara, you spoke of what kind of a life did my mother and Mr. Mujahideen have in Leonora. I think they were reasonably comfortable because Mum told the story of how someone dropped a sovereign, a gold sovereign, and it fell through the cracks in the wooden floor, and there was a lot of looking for it, and they found it. They found it again. So a sovereign in those days was a lot of money. So they weren't poor. They weren't struggling. Well, I guess I could say that that contrasts with when my mother had grown up and married her first husband, Mr. Cordwell, and then, strangely enough, history repeating itself, Mr. Cordwell died at a young age. And then my mother was a widow, and as she described it, she was as poor as a church mouse. And
With 2 children.
with 2 children, and it was tough. It was tough. One, her brothers, Uncle Mick or Uncle Butch, came up and got my mother and her 2 children, Alan and Dawn, and brought them on a truck back to Perth, and she then moved in with the family, the house of Mr. Barradine, Madassa Barradine. So whilst there wasn't great affection between my mother and her uncle, Mr. Barradine, he, in fairness to him, he took them in. He took in the poor widow and the 2 children.
But Violet had to work very hard because Mr. Barradine was quite a hard man, and he had a fruit and vegetable shop, and Violet had to work there all hours, and he wasn't appreciative of it. And she didn't have a good feeling towards him, but she felt obliged to do what she had to keep her children safe, and he did look after them.
The difference in the 2 brothers or half-brothers, we're not sure of that, but Mr. Madassa Barradine, being a devout Muslim, he went across to Mecca, I think twice, Carole, and died at sea on the way back from Mecca and was buried at sea. So we don't have a grave for Mr. Barradine. We do have for Mr. Mujahideen. But you know, in fairness, he looked after my mum and the children, we are grateful to him.
And the grave for Mr. Mujahideen, the first husband who died, there is no death certificate. I've made extensive inquiries, and that happened a lot with the Afghan Muslims. And the people that buried him would have been Muslim people in Coolgardie, and the government just thought, fine, you guys look after him, bury him, whatever, don't have to have any paperwork.
This is number 25.
Yep.
We might be able to send to you, Barbara, a photograph. Pamela, a photograph of the funeral of Uncle Jack of I don't know, Aberdeen in Northampton. So and there were men dressed in gear. So we'll send that photo to you.
We've actually been to the grave as well, and his head is buried towards Mecca. In the Coolgardie cemetery, David mentioned that there were some headstones of wealthier, better known people, Muslim leaders, but there were a couple of brothers that really were very successful camel traders in Coolgardie, the Wade brothers, and they employed lots and lots of people. They moved between South Australia and other areas, but they were based in Coolgardie, and someone came and had a grudge against one of the brothers and shot him, and one of those brothers has a lovely headstone near Mr. Mujahideen, and there's another headstone that is a religious leader. I don't know that much more about him, but they are the 2. They've got Islamic writing, but we've had it interpreted as well. So yes, there was still a lot of wealth around Coolgardie, a lot of wealth, and these 2 Wade brothers were very well known within the whole community.